Most people think the 1980s was the decade American performance died. They're wrong. It didn't die, it got expensive. If you want the poster child of the era, the Buick Grand National, you were paying $183 for every single horsepower under the hood. A number 3 car is $45,000 in 2026 and still climbing. That's not a car purchase, that's a luxury tax on a legend. The myth is real, the engineering was genuinely ahead of its time, and the market has fully, permanently priced that in. But if you stop looking at the badges and start looking at the math, there is a hidden list of cars the market has completely walked past. 8 entries, real Hagerty numbers, one very strange Thunderbird nobody talks about anymore. The 1980s didn't kill American performance, it scattered it, and scattered is exactly where the value hides. You know the Grand National story. Turbo V6, blacked out everything, running 13-second quarters at a time when the Corvette was still searching for its identity. The legend is earned and fully baked into the price. If you're still convinced the Grand National is the only 1980s car worth owning, wait until you see what $10,000 buys at the bottom of this list. Same framework as the pre-smog analysis. Cost per horsepower, Hagerty number 3 good condition values throughout. The math doesn't care about magazine covers. It never has. The benchmark, $183.67 per horsepower. The Grand National sits at the top not as a target, but as an honest, fixed point. GM's turbocharged 3.8-liter V6 produced 245 horsepower and 355 foot-pounds of torque from 6 cylinders at a time when the Corvette needed 5.7 liters of V8 to reach that same horsepower number. The intercooled turbo setup was ahead of everything else on the American street, and the blacked-out G-body proved it every time it left a stoplight. $45,000 for a number 3 car in 2026. The hype tax is fully loaded, same as the Hemi Cuda, same as the LS6 Chevelle. You're not just buying the car, you're buying 40 years of mythology. 7 other cars made real power this decade. None of them made the covers the Grand National did. All of them make more sense on a spreadsheet. The list. The same engine, no discount. 1989 Pontiac 20th Anniversary Turbo Trans Am. Around $163 per horsepower. If you want the Grand National's engine, Pontiac built an alternative, but in 2026 the market has figured that out. For the 20th anniversary of the Trans Am, Pontiac licensed the 3.8-liter Buick V6 and installed it in 1,555 white-on-white special edition cars. Factory rating was 250 horsepower, deliberately understated to avoid embarrassing Corvette, and documented dyno results put actual output closer to 300. You're buying underrated horsepower in a genuinely rare package. The problem is the price caught up. A number 3 TTA in 2026 is a $40,000 plus car, which puts CPH at roughly $163, near Grand National parity. This isn't a value play anymore. It's the rare alternative for the buyer who wants the turbo Buick engine in an F-body and understands exactly what they're paying for. The math is honest, and so is the premium. The NASCAR chassis in a tuxedo. 1987 Chevrolet Monte Carlo SS, $119.44 per horsepower. The market treats the Monte Carlo like something your retired uncle drives to the early bird special. That perception is exactly why it's cheap. The 1987 SS ran a 180 horsepower 305 V8, and while the earlier high-output variant had been phased out by this model year, the power rating held. What the market consistently forgets is that this G-body was simultaneously running NASCAR superspeedways, specifically in Aero Cup trim, with the sloped rear glass Chevy produced for high-speed aero. The Aero Cup is the one collectors should actually be hunting. The standard SS at $21,500 and $119.44 per horsepower is the entry point. The Aero Cup is the one the NASCAR history actually validates. The Parking Lot King, 1987 Chevrolet Camaro IROC-Z, $88.88 per horsepower. Now here's where the tribal war starts. The car that actually defined the high school parking lot in 1987 wasn't a Buick, it was the IROC-Z, and '87 was the year it finally got the engine it deserved, the 350 cubic inch L98 V8, the same engine living in the Corvette, producing 225 horsepower, $20,000 market value, $88.88 per horsepower. The 350 L98 came paired exclusively with the 700 R4 automatic, no manual option. But at this price point per horsepower, that's a trade most buyers will make without losing sleep. While Grand National buyers are fighting for $45,000 auctions, the IROC is sitting there with a 350 under the hood at less than half the per horsepower cost. The third-gen F-body still looks aggressive, and the market hasn't punished buyers for wanting one. The Fox body fights back. 1989 Ford Mustang GT 5.0, $83.56 per horsepower. The IROC handles better. The Mustang makes more power. This debate has been running since 1982, and it won't be settled here. The 1989 GT ran 225 horsepower through Mass Air EFI, the specific setup that matters to Fox body tuners, because the Mass Air metering system actually accommodates cam and head swaps without the computer losing its calibration. That's why the 89 Plus cars command a premium over the earlier speed density cars, and why the aftermarket around them is essentially unlimited. $18,800 for a number 3 car, $83.56 per horsepower. On a spreadsheet, the Mustang wins the rivalry by $5 per horsepower. In the comments, it will never be that clean.
But if you're willing to trade the Mustang's cool factor for a dedicated sports car chassis, the math gets even weirder. Notice the trend. We're halfway through, and the cars with the biggest legends are already losing the math war badly. The IROC and the Mustang, two of the most recognizable performance nameplates of the decade, are sitting at $88 per horsepower. The Grand National is at $183. That gap is not an accident. That gap is what mythology costs. 1988 Chevrolet Corvette Coupe, $70.61 per HP. The C4 is the punchline that became a bargain. Not as pretty as the C3, not as fast as the C5. For 20 years, it absorbed every midlife crisis joke anyone cared to throw at it, and the market parked it between two more desirable generations and largely ignored it. One thing worth knowing before you buy, the early C4s, 1984 through 1987, ran a suspension tuned so stiff that contemporary road tests use the word punishing. If you're looking at a number 3 driver, the 1988 and later cars address the worst of it. The chassis is purpose-built for nothing except performance, but verify the model year before you commit. $17,300. 245 horsepower from the L98 5.7-liter V8, $70.61 per horsepower in a fiberglass sports car that was engineered from the ground up to go fast. At some point, the jokes stop being funny and the math becomes undeniable. The C4 window is closing and it will not reopen. The GTA looks like a $50,000 car. 1987 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am GTA, $59.52 per HP. Until you see the window sticker, 210 horsepower from the tuned point injection 5.0-liter V8. That rating is for the 5-speed car. The automatic loses 20 horses to the torque converter. 16-inch gold accent wheels, WS6 sports suspension, and a stance that reads 2 price classes above what the market actually charges. $12,500, $59.52 per horsepower. This is the car that filled every action film and police drama of the decade. The visual identity is burned into the culture. The collector market has not caught up to what that recognition is worth, and that gap is still open right now. The car that failed the bedroom wall test, 1988 Ford Thunderbird Turbo Coupe, $52.50 per HP. Nobody had a poster of it. Nobody tattooed the hood graphic on their arm. It failed the bedroom wall test completely, and that failure produces the lowest cost per horsepower number on this entire list. $9,975, 190 horsepower, $52.50 per horsepower. But read this carefully before you buy. That number only applies to the 5-speed manual. The automatic ran reduced boost, 10 psi versus 15 psi on the manual, and was factory rated at 150 horsepower due to transmission limits. The automatic is a fundamentally different car. Verify the build sheet before you write a check. The 5-speed car ran a Garrett T3 turbocharger, feeding an intercooled 2.3-liter 4-cylinder, 4-wheel disc brakes, and a performance-tuned rear suspension. It also came with automatic ride control and an interior that felt less like a muscle car and more like a cockpit, more switches and gauges than most buyers knew what to do with. Ford used the platform for aero research that fed directly into their racing programs. Contemporary road tests put its handling ahead of European sport coupes at the same price point. It was a tech-heavy sleeper for buyers who didn't want the mullet car stigma. The market has completely forgotten it exists, and that oversight produces a number nothing else on this list can touch. The closing receipt. The numbers, final and in order. Grand National benchmark, $183.67 per horsepower. 20th anniversary Turbo Trans Am, around $163. Monte Carlo SS, $119.44. IROC-Z 358, $88.88. Mustang GT 5.0, $83.56. Corvette C4 Coupe, $70.61. Trans Am GTA, $59.52. Thunderbird Turbo Coupe, $52.50. One note on the numbers. 1980s performance values are moving fast. The generation that grew up with these cars is entering serious buying years, and the market is responding. The Thunderbird secret may already be partially out by the time you're watching this. The framework doesn't change. The urgency does. $131 separates the top of this list from the bottom. $131 per horsepower between the car with the mythology and the car with the math. The market prices stories. The cost per horsepower framework prices specs. The Grand National earned everything the market gives it. This was never about tearing down the legend. It was about showing you exactly what that legend costs in 2026. So here's the question worth sitting with. Is the cool factor worth an extra $131 per horsepower? Or have we all just been conditioned by 40 years of black paint? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want to know how to inspect any car on this list before you hand over a check, that video is next.